So you guys already know that I absolutely loved Tucker Carlson Down Under, the way that he was just giving it to the journalists, because all of their questions were so predictable. And when they got on the subject of Russia, 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 because how could they resist themselves, Tucker had the best response. Take a listen.
Putin! Putin!
Which I think you did strategically because you knew it's what we'd ask.
Putin! He's so bad!
And I also appreciate that...
Did he make you take the COVID shot?
Putin! That is exactly how a lot of us feel when they start hammering this Russia is bad narrative. We're just bored with it. And by the way, it's not just Putin. I am also so incredibly bored. I am exhausted. I am tired. I need a nap. When people start doing the Nazi and the, of course, literally Hitler comparisons, it's over. It's canceled. Please stop it. It really started drumming up in 2015 when Trump was running. Literally Hitler, literally MAGA. They're just like Nazis. It's always literally, right? It's never figuratively. They're like, no, literally Donald J. Trump is Hitler. And of course, I've gone through it. Any person really that has a platform has gone through this. But I will never forget this. Now that I'm on the other side of it and so many years have passed, the first time that I ever almost got canceled, it was because I was discussing Adolf Hitler in an academic sense. Actually, the subject wasn't even about Adolf Hitler. It was a question that was being asked of me. You remember this clip notoriously. They were asking about the word nationalism and why people are afraid of embracing the word nationalism. And I said that it was wrongly attributed to Adolf Hitler. And then BuzzFeed took me out of context. They made it seem as though I was saying Hitler was a good guy, which of course I wasn't. That's always a hoax when somebody is pretending that someone jumped up and said that. But it didn't matter. People were incensed. They were demanding my cancellation. I had Jewish groups demanding my cancellation and saying, how dare I? And I even got blacklisted temporarily from Fox News until Stuart Varney was the first one who had me on his show. And we talked about the scandal, and he gave me a piece of advice. He said, you should just never talk about Adolf Hitler. And at the time, I was so appreciative. I was like, thank you for allowing me to not have my entire platform canceled. But I reflect on that, and I'm like, what an absolute nonsense that is. And I'm not saying this about Stuart Varney, but just that general idea, and that is an idea that permeates, is that we are not allowed to discuss Adolf Hitler. Why? That is crazy, especially because he is the focus of all of our youth indoctrination, right? We have a visceral response when we hear his name. That's why I did the sound effect, dun, 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 because they've turned him almost into Lord Voldemort. I don't know if you're a Harry Potter fan. I definitely was and am one. And this whole concept of a dark lord who should not be named. Adolf Hitler is he who should not be named. And what's really interesting is that when you even discuss, you would assume, since that's the entire focus, the nucleus of our idea of who a bad person is, step aside Satan because we've got Adolf Hitler. When you assume that people therefore must know a lot about World War II, you then find out that actually Americans know nothing about World War II. My husband was amazed by this, by the way, obviously, because I'm in this sort of cross-national relationship. My husband was like, why do Americans always use Adolf Hitler as if, he was the number one mass murderer of the 20th century? He wasn't. What is this extreme focus on Nazis and Adolf Hitler as the only comparison we can ever make? And like I said, it's because we have been indoctrinated and we actually know nothing about the person other than the fact that we must fear him. And if you really, really, really want to insult someone, say, you are literally Hitler. Literally. And so, yeah, imagine my surprise. I know I've showed you this on the show before, but when I actually then started learning real history and I got out of the bubble of the American education system and I started recognizing these Soviet tactics of introducing really heavy concepts to kids while their brains are developing because you want to traumatize them. And you're traumatizing them because you want them to comply. And what you want them to comply with in this case is Germany, Nazi, Hitler, the greatest evil that's ever happened on earth, even though factually and statistically it is not. And part of that learning process for me when I started looking into it was coming across a huge fact that we ethnically, the Allies, ethnically cleansed 12 million Germans. Because when you say to people, okay, what is it about Hitler? Why is he the most evil? Well, the first thing people would say is, well, an ethnic cleansing almost took place. And now I offer back, you mean like we actually did to the Germans? Here's a clip again from that documentary I keep telling you that you have to watch. It premiered on BBC and it is entitled The Savage Peace. I'm going to give you a clip here of a Czechoslovakian civilian who watched what was done to his German-speaking neighbors immediately following the end of the war. Take a listen. They were the same. And you're probably thinking, but Candace, literally Hitler had the camps. That's what made it different. It was the camps. Imagine camps being used to kill people. Oh, you mean the exact same camps that we then transferred the Germans into so that we could, mass kill them? Yeah, I bet you've never heard the name Solomon Morel before, and you should know about him because Solomon Morel's an interesting character. He had some Soviet training, and then one day he just stood up on top of a table and said to these innocent German-speaking civilians, I'm going to torture you because I don't know where my parents are, and they were put into camps. And then he began to torture these individuals who were completely guilty of nothing. They were innocent. Here's another clip from that documentary. Take a listen. All under the direction of Solomon Morel. He was a particularly sadistic individual. Now you might be thinking, sure, something must have happened to him. He must have faced some consequences. And you'd be right. He did. In 1996, and this is according to his Wikipedia page, Solomon Morel was formally indicted of genocide by the Polish Public Prosecutor's Office. The indictment was later amended to include war crimes, crimes against humanity, and communist crimes because he was a commie. The latter charge was added in 2004 and constitutes a specific crime under Polish criminal law. So in 1998, Poland requested that he be extradited for the trial, but Israel refused. Yeah, that's where he was hiding out in Israel. And so Israel sent a reply to the Polish Justice Ministry from the Israeli government that said that they would not extradite him because the statute of limitations had expired on war crimes. So you can put, Germans into a pyramid, innocent civilians. You can watch them suffer. You can murder them in mass. And I guess statute of limitations can expire. That's all I'm going to say on that because Israel is, of course, our greatest ally, the most moral everything in the world. Do you know who else agreed with those Czechoslovakian civilians that the things that were done to the Germans were utterly horrific? General George Patton Jr., you're probably familiar with his name because he was a very decorated U.S. general in World War II who led the Third Army, both in France and in Germany. Well, post-war, they appointed him as the military governor in Bavaria, and he led denazification efforts because that's what we're doing. We're trying to denazify the territory. That's a great effort. But then they say that as he was leading this, he became, quote unquote, increasingly erratic. PBS states that in April of 1945, he was removed by Eisenhower from his leadership of the Third Army for making inflammatory remarks concerning the denazification policies. What were those policies? He said, quote, "We may have been fighting the wrong enemy all along, but while we're here, we should go after the bastards now because we're going to have to fight them eventually." He's referring to the Soviets that trained that person that I just showed you, who were utterly sadistic and mass murdering Germans for no reason other than the fact that they were speaking German. They hadn't even voted for Adolf Hitler, had nothing to do with anything, but they had to die. So yeah, if that's what your concern is, if you're worried about camps, we did that. If you're worried about ethnic cleansing, we did that. Don't even get me started on the camps that we forced our own American citizens into following Pearl Harbor. Yep. That's a thing as well. Of course, you remember that. Japanese, some people weren't even Japanese. They were just Japanese looking. And we went ahead and we put them in camps after Pearl Harbor and we made them stay there until the end of war. So don't let that be something that you think we're not capable of. But then you move on to the experimentation. Yes, of course, that's been embedded into our minds. The Nazis experimented on innocent people. Candace, come on, that's the difference. They experimented on twins. I mean, some of the stories, by the way, sound completely absurd. I mean, like the idea that they just cut a human up and then sewed them back together. Why would you do that? Literally, even if you're the most evil person in the world, that's a tremendous waste of time and supplies. Just slice a person in half and sew them together. That just sounds like bizarre propaganda, but let's just go with it. Let's say that that's actually true. Okay, that experimentation is the thing that sets the Nazis apart. Well, why did we bring them all over here thereafter? What was Operation Paperclip? We took all of those top Nazi scientists and we brought them to America. I wonder why we did that. Maybe for a little more experimentation. Have you heard of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb? Have you ever heard of the CIA? If you think experimentation is unique to the Nazis, you need to wake up. Oh, but Candace, the Nazis murdered people with the special needs. You heard of Planned Parenthood? They literally tell you to abort your children if they have special needs. You learn that in the school system. And in terms of experimentation, I invite you again as required readings. This book, Chaos, man. They're talking about this specific operation that took place under the directive of LBJ, who was also a monster, a monstrous president that we had. And this operation was called Phoenix. And I'm just going to read you just a couple of sentences here. Their attempts were sometimes even more unhinged. In 1968, CIA scientists at the Bien Hoa prison outside Saigon surgically opened the skulls of 3 prisoners, implanted electrodes on their brains, gave them daggers, and left them alone in a room. They wanted to shock the prisoners into killing one another. But when the efforts failed, the prisoners were shot and their bodies were burned. Yeah, that's an operation where we just were mass killing civilians, which we do a lot. But there, of course, if we do it, it's different. It's different because we're not literally Hitler. We drop bombs on entire populations. We firebomb Christians. We drop a nuke on praying Catholics. And if you know about it, you get screamed at by the propagandists in the West. Knowing about it is the crime. The crime is not actually dropping a bomb on praying civilians in Nagasaki. That's not the crime. The crime is not firebombing people through Ash Wednesday in Dresden who were civilians, children. No, that's not the crime. The crime is you knowing. It's me knowing. That's the real problem. And I got to stop knowing these things. I got to stop knowing about Pol Pot. I got to stop knowing about the Cambodian genocide and knowing that, of course, there were people that did worse things throughout history. Especially as a Christian, I have got to stop talking about Henry Yagoda. They get real upset when you talk about the Bolsheviks. You want to know why? Because the Bolsheviks were never brought to heel. The Bolsheviks never had to face trials. There were no Nuremberg trials for the Bolsheviks. In fact, many of them came to America, and many of them are in positions of power right now. And that's why they get real angry when you start looking into history, when you start recognizing that they are intentionally telling Christians to shut up about the Christians that have been killed all across the world. They get very uncomfortable when you know stuff that they did not put into your book when you were in middle school to traumatize you into compliance of believing that the only bad people ever, there's only 2 of them, by the way, Putin and Adolf Hitler. So to those people, I'm just going to say, spare me. Because I'm not going to stop talking about real history. I'm going to educate people that follow me about real history because it's the only way that we're going to prevent these psychopaths from doing more psychopathic things in the future. If you're looking for people that behave like literally Hitler, it ain't me, buddy. You got to start examining your own government. That's all I'm going to say on that topic.